So welcome, everybody. I see that we just opened up the webinar, so we'll give it a minute, get everybody on, and we'll jump into the Q&A. If you're here for PESOSE, you're in the right place. If you're not, feel free to drop out. And what we're going to do today is an open mic. However, we're going to start with some certain topics. So if you've been on some of my previous webinars, the last one we had about 3 hours. We won't have 3 hours today, but we will have a solid hour and a half. So we're going to try to move through this quickly. And I have my colleague, PD colleague Marlon Pierce is on. Marlon Pierce is on the line, so he's going to help us with Q&A. We're going to ask that you put those in the Q&A queue. To the extent that we can get to everybody, we will. If not, I'm going to start just sending responses kind of en masse on some common questions we get. So I am going to ask, do we have a critical mass of questions in the Q&A box, Marlon? Well, while he's doing that, I want to remind everybody of the mailbox. You've got questions, generic ones, or very, very specific ones. The phone does work. It just doesn't always do a good job at transcribing those if I happen to not be at my desk. And this is the other. So I am going to leave us at that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is if you've got a question, raise your hand. And we're going to start with something other than I-Corps. I got a lot of questions the last time. We used about 50% of our time on I-Corps. We will get to that. What I would like to do is take any question that has to do with the technology or something more focused on the project itself. So if you got a question, please raise your hand and then I'll call on you. We're going to ask you to do one question per person and then I'll just keep cycling those through. So do we have anybody with a question? You want to raise your hand and come off mic. And Ross, your name popped up. So Ross, want to help us with your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
If you could speak up a little bit, the sound is a little bit low.
All right, I'm just gonna, I'll just talk louder. Is this better?
It is.
All right. So we have a hardware OSP, and we are planning to organize some build workshops. So basically having researchers come out and get hands-on and actually build up some of the hardware. We were wondering if we would be able to use some of the funds to subsidize some of the hardware costs for those workshops and/or subsidize the travel of researchers.
Yeah, so let me answer your broad question. We get this a lot. This is not a program for R&D. So any kind of research and development is a no. It's a strong no for this program. However, it's all about framing. If that building the hardware or touching the hardware is part of building the ecosystem, it's an engagement like a hackathon, have at it. That's absolutely appropriate. Participant support is what you're asking about in the NSF parlance. That is permissible. The one exception to that is you may not support through the NSF funds international engagements, either on the proposal or through workshops. So you'd have to find another mechanism to support individuals if they want to participate. So more broadly, international participants in terms of paying from the award is not permissible, nor is a member of the team. They can still be and participate. You would just have to find other mechanisms to do that. Okay. Yes, we're going to.
Can I follow up on that?
Just quickly, we're going to be really fierce because we only have an hour and a half today. So quickly.
Yes. Understood. Yes. So if I heard you correctly, so these are the hardware is something that the participants themselves would be purchasing. And the idea was that the workshop would be more of like a training. Is a training okay?
So remember, this is about building an ecosystem.
Right.
And building developers, contributors, governance structures, governance structures, strategies, depending upon if you're track 1 or track 2. So it's all about framing. If you're not careful, this could look like we're just funding or you want us to fund a training session for people to learn how to use the hardware, which is not going to be probably received well. So you want to think about this, Ross, and how you frame. Hope that helps.
Okay.
Yep. Brian, you have your hand up.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Great. So we have an open data set, and that data set allows you to connect people to research and companies so that you can actually traverse the graph. So it's a bunch of reference IDs. And my question is, like, for data sets in particular in the proposal, is there anything specific that we should make sure that we include? Like, should we be including a link to the data assets themselves, a schema, data dictionary? I'm just kind of wondering, like, what's best practices there?
Yes, a couple of things. You're building an open source ecosystem. You are required, everybody online, you are required to show a link to your asset. That is required. Please read the solicitation. So that actually tells you where to put that link. Right. Most of the time for track one, because depending upon how mature the system is or the asset, reviewers won't be digging deep into it and commenting on it, other than if you bill yourself as a mature ecosystem and they get into the link and they don't see it, or their activity doesn't reflect that, that could be a problem. I will say data sets in and of themselves is not good enough. You have to talk about the intellectual merit of that asset or that product. So if you're not familiar with the NSF review criteria, please look at those. So what is it about this data set? How is it going to be advancing knowledge? What are the broader impacts that come out of that? So this is not a data set effort. They're not prohibited, but in the context of building an open source ecosystem, what we want to know is how important is that data set? How is it going to move intellectual knowledge forward? What's unique about this? What technology communities does it serve? Hope that helps. Brian?
Yes. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, David. David disappears, so I'm gonna, Nicholas.
Hello.
Odd, yes, Nicholas, and then I see David's hand up, so we'll circle back after you're done. Yes, please, your question.
Yeah, so we have a software system that is used. I'm just wondering the scope of the ecosystem. Hello. I was wondering what the sorry, there's a little thing. The scope of the ecosystem. So we have one GitHub that is software that's creating systems that other people use. And then we also have other GitHubs that is software that we're working on that is connected. They're not the same GitHub repository. So is it okay to have multiple repositories that are under this whole ecosystem? Because I mean, the ecosystem is sort of this specific one GitHub repository, but there are many connections into it that we are also a part of.
So we're agnostic on how many get connected. You have to sell the reviewers in NSF that the ecosystem you're building and the assets you're bringing forward make sense.
Right.
So it's not about the number of products, it's about the technology. How are you going to advance the intellectual merit of this? How are you going to advance knowledge? What's the broader impacts? So data and data platforms in and of themselves, and just a database, if it gets presented in that or a piece of software, is not for this program. It's about building that ecosystem, the data maintainers, the contributors, the governance structures, everything around it that will help the effort that you're trying to execute be self-sustaining. So it's really about how you present that to NSF. You must, as part of the proposal, you must speak to the maturity of your ecosystem. You must speak to the maturity of the asset or assets. If you've got multiple assets, you want to convince the reviewers there's some synergy or there's some reason, or maybe they're working on multiple pathways. If you try to sell a mature ecosystem with these multiple sets and there's no governance structure or strategy to deal with these multiple assets, then that's going to be a problem. So the answer is we don't have any bounds. You define what the bound is or the scope. You convince the reviewers that it makes sense You know, I could see
Right.
many reasons that you might have multiple assets, but there must be an underlying theme or objective for pulling these things together and bringing all these contributors and maintainers, et cetera, together. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Uh-huh. Marlon, you're scanning the Q&A for us. Are you seeing any kind of common theme while we wait for others who want to raise their hand?
This is my 4 questions, of course, but we're going to take those, or you're going to take those in a minute. I'm not sure I see a common theme right now, but maybe if people just want to raise their hand and speak up, that would be great, because I'm getting to these as fast as I can, but probably going to be quicker if people just ask you directly.
Okay, got it. Okay, David.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, the unmute box did not come up as fast as it perhaps should have earlier. I apologize for that. Yeah, getting to this question again, and I did attend last week. Thank you for that as well. So this is like a follow-up question from last week. So again, we're a track 1 proposal from an academic institution. The issue with the asset, the core technology that is going to be enclosed in this open source ecosystem is that the technology, a lot of the core development was done by developers at an FFRDC. And so I understand that there's some stipulations for getting FFRDCs involved as funded collaborators. Some key elements that I think they would be essential at is identifying security gaps and addressing security gaps, as well as the open source licensing element, because they are a core contributor. Institutional requirements at their institution would require them to be involved in the licensing part and other potential governance aspects of the open source ecosystem. And so I understand that one of the stipulations is that if this is considered a special project, there might be exceptional circumstances that would allow for their involvement. Obviously, they can't lead this, so that's not the intention. But the intention here would be to have some kind of a special circumstance allowing them to be a funded collaborator or contributor.
Great. So let me just slow it down a little bit for everybody on the phone. If you have an interest in getting somebody from a federally funded research and development center, an FFRDC, and you are looking to get them engaged, this is what David is asking. So here's what you want to do. You want to think about the money flow. How will they get paid? This is going to be some of the consideration for NSF. Why? Because NSF can't be using funds to support something that their institution or a government agency is funding through that institution, right? NSF has FFRDC, so we can't be double funding things. So the reason why you ask you to send us an email and tell us the details is because it's very hard to explain or give you a yes or likely without seeing the details. So what I would encourage you guys to do, if you have an FFRDC, you want to get them engaged, there's some very specific limitations on that. So go to the solicitation. It talks about their participation as a co-PI senior personnel. If they don't fall into that category and they bring a special skill set, you need to tell us about that. Why would you go to the FFRDC to do this? Why them? And then let us know about that. And then we can give you a read on it. So that's the logic and thinking around that, is what special skill set are they bringing to the table that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get? And then how does the money flow? How do you expect to compensate them, either directly through the award or there was some other mechanism for them to get involved in any other piece of this ecosystem building? We don't have a problem with that, especially if they're not one of those key positions. Does that help, David?
That helps a lot. And I'm just curious too, in that that line of that communication logic that you recommended, should we copy the FFRDC individuals, those co-PI principles?
No,
to
we're
help?
gonna,
Okay.
no, just send it to us. And then if we need, at some point, if we get far enough in the process, we'll reach out to the FFRDC if we need to. But the point is, you really need to demonstrate to the government why you're going to a federally funded research and development center to get a set of skills, right? That's the crux of the issue, and potential overlap in funding that these government entities could have.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Is it Zhu Lee or Lee Zhu? Sorry,
Joe.
it's hard.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you said Zhu?
Yeah, Joe.
Okay, Zhu. All
Hi.
right, it's all yours.
Hi. Yeah, good. Yeah, I have a question about my project. It's track 3 security. So we are trying to build a tool actually helping the open source community to detect the bugs. So my question is about hardware and the workshop. We also think about those two options. But hardware, we are thinking about to run in our system to automatically detect those bugs and actually tell the developers, okay, you have those bugs. So we feel it's actually a better to run our systems because they may not have the hardware to run our approach. So we wonder if the hardware can be budgeted. The second question is also about the workshop. So we are thinking about have the workshop just to hopefully have the OSS developers and communities to learn more about building a secured OSS software. So we wonder if this can be supported by this funding. This is my questions.
I think so this, I'm going to answer it broadly so everybody can hear about this. If you want to purchase infrastructure, you really need to make the case for that, right? Because this isn't an infrastructure building in the traditional sense where we're interested in buying computers and computer systems. We understand that there needs to be infrastructure for testing and sandboxes, et cetera. So you're going to have to make a strong case for it. It's always about balance. So Zhu, I didn't get all the details, but it sounded like you possibly want to run this on your own system. That's really up to you on how you want to run it, right? You just have to demonstrate that the open source can get to it, that you have that capability for others to get to it, and that you want to be thinking about scaling and the reach. The whole purpose of a track 3 is that you're solving classes of vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities, then once you put them into action, is that you want to be able to demonstrate that you've been effective in deploying this, not only to the open source ecosystem that you present, but any others, right? Everything we do is about impact. So when you're solving your problems, you want to be thinking about what current problem are you solving, and then how are you going to convince NSF that that problem has some applicability and a broad reach in the community. So I hope that helps. And then the workshop and training, I would say, again, you've got to convince us that that activity that you want to do, which is teaching as I hear it, this learnings, has something to do with what you're supposed to be doing in the track 3, which is solving vulnerabilities. I could make the case, I could see that you could make the case, but it's all about framing. So you want to think about how does that learning directly impact the work that you're trying to do or accomplish. And if you can frame it in that way, of course, I could see an easy way to do that. But you want to make sure it's not just framed as a separate activity happening to teach people how to do cybersecurity. That won't really be received well. You have to connect it back to the objective of the award. Does it help you?
Okay. Yes, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, of course. Young May? Young May, your hand is up. You're
Okay.
off. Yep.
All right. I have 2 questions related to the budgeting. So I've heard that you're saying that you can budget like expense up to 30K. And I was proposing that, okay, the PI and the co-PI have some salary. Is it okay to budget additional compensation for anyone who participates in ICOP training? Because I've envisioned not all of my co-PI will participate in ICOP training. Is that correct?
Yes, so I'm going to make this more general for everybody on the phone. So if you are proposing and you've never attended ICOR training, you have the opportunity to take up to $30,000 of your budget and set it aside for compensation. Up to 30K. It can be $0, it can be $1, it can be 30,000. You can include as many people as you want in that, but we're going to limit you to 30K. I would just say be careful of your budgets. If you're consuming all of your budgets in ICOR training, or you're taking away from some other activities, that could be a problem, right? So this isn't, you want to think about your strategies. How are you compensating people, the core people that make sense, that are going to be around for continuity purposes? In some cases, industry mentors may come at no cost. But if you can't spend more than 30K on the ICOR training, and if your PIs and co-PIs can't attend, that's a problem. So you need some core people attending that I-Core training. They need to be in there firsthand. For everybody on the phone, this is a condition of your award. So if there are attendance problems, NSF will have a conversation. We don't take this lightly. We think this is an important part of a successful award. I hope that helps.
Can I get one more clarification about attending the I-Corp training? I remember you said like 3 people that can attend. So I'm envisioning me definitely attend another entrepreneurial leadership. Is it okay to have more than 3 people attend the I-Corp?
Yes, we've been hearing between 4 and 5.
Oh, okay, that's great. So are my co-PI required to attend? I have 2 co-PI.
That's probably fine. We try to be flexible about this. It's just, we have limits, right? We can't have 10 people in the room. We definitely need the 3, the technical lead, the entrepreneurial lead, and the industry mentor. If there are 2 others, let's say, that have a key role in this, but the point is we need consistency. The trainers need consistency. So the team needs to be coordinated and we need consistent people attending. So it's not like 5 people rotating and you take one day, I'll take another.
Gotcha.
So really think about your strategy.
And then it can be used just for compensation, right? For the up to 30K.
Up to 30K, right. Your reviewers are going to ask you, the reviewers are going to ask, look at the entire team and the entire effort. And we have situations where PIs and co-PIs get compensated, but the rest of the team doesn't. That becomes that's not a great look on your budget. So I would say encourage everybody to look at your budgets. And when you're compensating some groups and not another, that can look negative. You want to ask yourself, why am I compensating these individuals and why are these other ones not getting compensated?
Yeah. But my problem right now is my local budgeting people is like, I want to put like the 25K or 30K for the I-Corp training. And our system is like, if it's a salary, you move to the salary. Do I need to break down that? That's the problem I'm having.
Yes, if you could send me an email, just put it in the Q&A with the details and I can hash through those. It's really hard to do it all the time, but yeah, send it an email. Okay, Jazgul, do I have that right?
Yes, thank you. I am building a team to create, we have an ecosystem that will essentially bring in data sets with matching student and teacher materials to onboard K-12 education to free open resources to enhance like data science education. And we have an AI component that we're building out to hopefully allow teachers with no data science experience themselves to better like orient themselves to the material and also hopefully to repurpose and like subset and filter data sets to be more meaningful to their location or for their students. And I was just wondering, we have already started building the platform, but we are thinking of going track 1 just because we're in the very early stages of this. And I was wondering if this is a good avenue to go.
So I'm going to use this, I hope you won't mind, as a to help others hear what I'm saying, because you have, so how would you describe in a simple sentence, what is the maturity level of your ecosystem from nascent to mature? Like
I would say adolescent.
It's in the middle, or is it nascent, or is it?
I guess I would say like the number of resources on the platform, because we are testing with teachers currently to see that like they are helpful in the way that they're formatted is nascent, but the platform itself is built. It's just like awaiting more content development, I suppose.
Okay, so your product or your asset is somewhere in the middle. It's not a mature one. How about your ecosystem? Where is that?
Ecosystem is, I would say, like elementary school. We have a set of data fellows and teachers that are working with us to help build out content and data set.
Okay, so you want to think about the language for everybody to hear me. You want to use open source language. Who are your contributors? Who are your maintainers? Do you have a governance structure? Do you have an onboarding? Do you have a link to an open source product? You have to have that. So get on GitHub, get on GitLab, whatever you can, and put it out there. It has to be for this program. So what I'm hearing too is, and you guys will hear me say this a lot, it's about how you frame your technology. What is the value add? What would NSF say that what would you tell NSF and its reviewers about the intellectual merit of your technology? So the output may be a data set, but what's the intellectual merit around that? How would you convince NSF and its reviewers that this is of the highest quality and it's going to move an entire field or beyond that forward if you can get this ecosystem built? So it's about framing your ecosystem and the story that you're telling. So from what you're telling me, it's hard for me to really know what the technology is. I hear you talking about a product. I hear you talking about education. What I don't hear is the intellectual merit of this. So you want to think about how you might frame this. Like, is there a discipline that it would serve? Is it a workflow? Is it an algorithm that's going to help move the science and education workflow along?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Uh-huh. So Ross, I know we've had your hand up. I'm going to ask if somebody else, and then we'll come back to you, Ross, if others.
Sounds good.
Anybody else? I can't see beyond Ross, so I'm going to ask somebody just to kind of jump in. I can't see the others. I can't see your names.
Thomas. Thomas has a question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ashley. Thomas.
Yeah, I'm Thomas Navarro. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Thomas.
Okay, yeah. I have just completed 2 patents, one of them on April the 30th of 2026 and the other one on June 26th of 2026. And I also, my website is supersymmetry.com, and I can move payloads in a gravitational field with eccentric mass revolving about a center axis. So with the Higgs field, we can use the Higgs field to move payloads in outer space because the Higgs field is what gives mass its properties. So I'm putting in for a project pitch, and I just want to see if this is something I can be helped with. I can send you a copy of the project pitch if you'd like.
Well, let me see if I can get to this. Do you have an ecosystem that, do you have a managing organization? Are you thinking about how are you going to move this technology forward? I hear a project. What I don't hear is an ecosystem. So
well,
yes.
Basically, being that I have the patents, I'm on solid ground. So at this point, I just need to move forward with some funding opportunities to get this process started. So
Thomas,
I have all the models, and I have working, functioning experimental proof. So I'm on solid ground with that. So that's the reason I'm in this meeting, is to check and see. Like I said, I'm submitting a project pitch to the National Science Foundation, but I just need to go ahead and see what if you can be of any help to me.
So Thomas, maybe you could put something in the Q&A and we can get back to you. What I think I'm hearing is that you've got a strong piece of technology. What I'm not hearing, though, and we may need to try to match you up with a managing organization, is what your vision is, what the problem you want to solve, and how you're going to build an ecosystem around that.
Yeah, so basically we can upgrade the power plants to helium-3 fusion reactors, because with my system we can go ahead and do the HE3 lunar mining, asteroid mining, satellite maintenance, satellite upgrades, because I can move payloads in outer space with electrical energy rather than rockets. So we're upgrading the entire process.
So let's get your Q&A in, like, if you can give us that information and remind me that you did this. And then maybe we can have an offline conversation about trying to get you with a group to build an ecosystem, because as you're currently sharing it, I'm not sure we're going to get you there. But let's have that conversation separately. And I'm going to try Sarita now. And bear with me, I'm moving through these pretty fast.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Sarita.
Yeah, hi. I'm actually a proxy for Sarita. She had to do some
Oh.
emergency travel, but she submitted a question. This is a continuation of a discussion from the last webinar, which was very helpful. But Sarita's thinking about her open source ecosystem, and it has been taken up. There are multiple existing funded projects with other collaborators. There's been some industry-related awards that are using the system as well. And so she really wanted to make sure that she was clarifying for those letters that need to be written, and I think Marlon answered already a little bit, but the idea of like, where do you draw the line on relationship to the proposing team? So the quick example that she relayed to me was, if she's PI on another grant that is leveraging that system to reach a goal, can subawardees on that, if they aren't part of the proposing team, write letters for this proposal?
Okay, let me try to answer generically for anybody that's listening.
Yeah.
For letters of collaboration, want to remind you this is not letters of support. So the purpose of a letter of collaboration is not to demonstrate or express your support or weigh in on the project, anything like that. Right? That is a letter of support. So if you read it and it sounds like they're endorsing your project, you need to remove it and start over. The purpose of the letter of collaboration is to demonstrate to NSF and its reviewers that those individuals are invested in the project in some manner. And
Okay,
they
yeah,
will
yeah.
tell us what that manner is. The question you're asking is the requirement that the collaborators not be a part of the team.
Correct.
Right. So think about it in this way generically. And you have to design where that scope is or where that boundary is. But ask yourself if it passes a sniff test. Does it sound like somebody that is on your project is basically saying, I'm supporting your project? Right? So if they're a subaward on the current project or they're getting funding, it starts to skate along the lines like saying that the people that are proposing are the ones that are collaborating. So you want some distance between those groups.
Okay.
How much distance? That's a judgment call. But I would say, and without me seeing it, I would say that it's when it starts to get into contractual relationships, most certainly if it's another project, there might be enough distance, right? But you
Okay.
want to be thinking, how much distance is there between the person that is saying I'm collaborating and the current project? And how are they contributing? Right? How are they contributing to the project, not maybe some downstream product? We want to know that they have some contribution to the open source ecosystem that's being built.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Appreciate that. And I think she followed up with an email too. So.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Susanta,
Yes.
I think you're up next. Yes.
Thank you for doing this. I have one question. Does this salutation require a pointer to the existing publicly available open source product and make it bigger and more accessible to people, and people can contribute to that? And if that is the case, it is appears to me is like more of a large scale cyber infrastructure type development. And in that context, what type of intellectual merit is important?
Okay, let me try to break this down for everybody. Is the purpose of providing a link to NSF and the reviewers is it gives the reviewer and NSF some information on what actually is either being built or has been built. So the extent of your asset and the tools that you'll be using and how active that is, how active the community is really a condition of the status of your open source ecosystem. So if you come to NSF and you write a proposal and say, I have a very mature ecosystem, and the reviewer logs in and they see GitLab and they see 2 contributors, or they dig a little deeper and they see that there's been no activity in 5 years, that's going to be a hard sell. the data doesn't support what the words are saying. It's up to you to sell to NSF how big that ecosystem should be. Some ecosystems, especially nascent ones, could be very small. But what we want to hear is what you're thinking around the trajectory. Where do you want to go with it? How big should it be? And how do you know that? What's the rationale for that? So you know more than we will about how big that ecosystem should be eventually. What is your strategy to figure that out? And where you are. So you're going to tell us the maturity level of your ecosystem and the maturity level of your product or your asset. You're going to come out and tell us in that proposal, and then the link is going to be one resource for the reviewers and NSF to look at. So that's just going to be a sanity check to say, if it's a nascent ecosystem, A, does it exist? Is it open source? That's a first requirement. Great, if it is, and they've said it's a nascent ecosystem, then fine. And then the reviewers will move on to see what kind of strategies, where the group is. I missed the other piece though. Susanto, what was the other part of your question?
So for example, like, so in that case, what type of intellectual merit is important, right? So if there is a existing very good open source software product and I'm transitioning to an even bigger tool which is publicly available and can be done simulation on on the web browser, so make it like a cyber infrastructure. So what type of intellectual merit is important?
Well, I would encourage you to go back and look at the NSF merit review criteria.
Okay.
Making something bigger or more active in and of itself, especially if it's framed that way, is probably not going to be received well by the reviewers. You really have to say, what is the technology that I'm trying to move forward, and how is it going to move knowledge along, right? Maybe you have a data set, and opening up that data set that's been closed all these years is going to move biomaterials along. And how do you know? And then you make the case for that, for example. So it's hard in a very generic sense, but I would say I haven't seen a lot of proposals that could speak to size alone and access alone as a way to sell the intellectual merit. Typically, it's something within a domain or across technical domains that starts to move knowledge forward, or a particular workflow that has been problematic or knowledge gap. So it really depends on your focus. So Santo, I know that's not going to probably, you'll need to think about it, but if you want to put something in the Q&A, we'll if you've got some more details.
I've written that down, but I think I got a sense that I need to point out to the knowledge gap that this proposed work will solve.
Yes.
Or
Okay.
address to, right? So
yes.
And
yes.
the steps towards that. Yeah, that sounds logical. Thank you so much.
Of course. And Luca.
Thank you so much for this session. In our particular case, we are developing a large data sharing platform for biomedical data that's in the open for folks to put on and search and find biomedical data. It's used by thousands of people monthly, so that the ecosystem that's using and contributing the data is very large. However, the ecosystem that's developing this software that's open source, it's mostly located within our company with just a few outside contributors and sparse and far in between. And so in this particular case, what can we call ecosystem, and what are your suggestions there?
Right. So for everyone, as you think about your ecosystem, if it's open source, right, it should be available to a broad set of users, contributors, maintainers, and you define who that is. Who is your target audience and why? Who is your, I don't want to say customer, but who is your primary stakeholder? So you may have a large set of users, but your contributor community and your maintaining community may be small, right? So it's up to you to define and tell us and tell the reviewers, who is that? Who is in that broader stakeholder? Who are you trying to reach? And then if you're satisfied with your contributing community and the size of that, and you're satisfied with your maintaining community, You can say that and you can defend that. But drawing a line around the scope, you want to think about what broad impacts that you want to have, right? I imagine that, and we just talked to somebody where I said size in and of itself is not a good selling point. So it's possible you might have a small ecosystem, but reviewers eventually going to say, why is that a legitimate thing to have? How are you going to have broader impacts? Are you going to be the only group that has this piece of information? Well, why? Right. So it's a little bit hard to, I think, tell you to put the ecosystem. I would say, think about your stakeholders. Who are they? Who are you trying to reach? What's your vision, long-term vision? And then back yourself into it and say, where do I want to start? And it sounds like within your company, you have a start, right? But it's like deciding. That's the whole purpose of a track one, is to try to help you figure out how to properly scope that. So this is a really good thing to kind of connect back to I-Corps. The whole purpose of I-Corps is to do exactly this. What I just described is, who are your stakeholders and how do you know those are your stakeholders? And we would say, and I-Corps would say, you've got to talk to your potential community, and then they're going to give you feedback. And then that feedback is going to come back and you're going to look at it. And I-Corps is going to give you that opportunity to have that conversation in a very structured way. So if you don't know who your stakeholders or the broader ecosystem and how big you want to make it, it's probably a track one that you're in. By track two, you should know what that ecosystem is and what you think it is, right? And as information comes in, you may broaden that, you may narrow it. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks. It does.
Yep. Okay. Okay, Ross, you've had your hand up, but I can't see
Yes.
anybody else, so or somebody else. Or
Yes,
Ashley.
yes, Ross, and I can see the hand. So if you can't see, just let me know, and I'm happy to tell you who's next.
Okay, we're gonna have Ross, and then you'll let me know, Ashley, if you could. Thanks.
Yes.
Ross, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Florence. And can you still hear me this time?
I
know I
can
had
hear
some.
you.
Awesome. Yeah, so just some real quick background. I am going to ask a question about kind of where the lines are around development. For some context on our project, we are an NSF-funded project for open robot hardware and open robot software. And we have sort of community expressed interest in taking existing software modules from contributors in our ecosystem and trying to integrate those software modules with the hardware. And so we were wondering if PESOSE funds can be used to fund research internships to support people integrating their software modules within the ecosystem. Does that constitute development, or is that a supported process?
That sounds more like R&D to me. I'll be honest. So we recognize, I will say, that as you're building out some of the IT pieces, right, the platforms or integrating software for contributors or tools that you're building, that there's some level of that to get it out into the community, right? So let's say you're a mature ecosystem or you're on the cusp, and you've got a piece, and in order to make that component more accessible as your ecosystem grows, you have to do a little bit of development, improvement. The program would support that. But what I'm hearing from you is there's some interest in integrating these things, and there has to be some research around it. And that sure sounds like R&D to us rather than ecosystem building.
Okay.
Yep.
Understood. Thank you.
Alexander. I see your hand up, Alexander.
Thank you. I had one question about website support, but I asked that in chat, got an answer. Thank you very much. My other question is, could you say a bit more about the training that we would provide under the project for current and potential user bases? So what exactly can we cover there? Is it like facilities? I think you spoke some to the nature of paying for people working on this project to be able to provide that training and develop it, but then so I guess just general question about what all we should expect to include in the proposal for that section of the funding. Thank you.
Yep. Again, I'm gonna, because I don't know what groups are thinking about. Track one is about developing the strategies, right? That's what it's about. How are you going to get this ecosystem? Who's your target? What's your timeline to get there? Who do you see as maintainers, contributors? All of that's around planning and scoping. We've got a lot of questions around where do I build my ecosystem? Where does it start? Where does it stop? That's a track one. Training, then, by the time you get to a track 2 or close to that, you should already sort of have a sense of where there are needs in the ecosystem. So if you want to build, let's say, part of it is that you need to be heavy in the maintainers and you need some training around that. That would be perfectly fine, but it's got to be targeted towards building the ecosystem, not training about the technology. Right. So there could be, I could see where contributors or users might want to understand how that technology is used. And you might want to do that as part of your stakeholder engagement. You might want to go out to a workshop and you say to everybody, hey, we'd love to see you be part of our contributors or users. We need to show you a little bit about how it all works. You could frame that as training. But if you're talking about you want to sit groups of students down to show them how to use the system so that long-term they can move their research forward, that's probably outside the bounds of what we would support.
Okay, thank you. So just as a quick follow-up, if I may, so the focus of those trainings then is to help users of the community contribute back to the ecosystem, not just, hey, here's how you use the ecosystem.
That's right. It's about building that ecosystem. It's about, right, and depends on what the tool is, what the technology is, what the status of the ecosystem is, justifying why that's necessary. I could see a lot of reasons why you might have a very new technology that's very nascent and that it's so new that getting potential users involved is necessary, or quote, training. But if you start to get into a session where you've got groups of people and there is no connection back to the ecosystem, then that could be problematic. So it's a fine line, right? It's really about how you tell the story.
Okay, thank you very much.
Florence, we have a hand raised from Tuan Das.
Okay, Tuan, you're up. The floor is yours. Yep.
So I had a question about the participation of FFRDCs. I have sent an email a few days back. We are trying for track 2, and we have a co-PI who is a FFRDC and a collaborator also. Both are being sub-awardees. We wanted to now the thing is that the FFRDCs, they would prefer to have a little better resolution on if they can participate. So I'm not sure what is the way to get that confirmation. I have sent an email with some details about what their participation is going to be. Our other issue is that we have to kind of wrap up the proposal in a little bit ahead of time before the 1st September deadline. So I was just wondering what kind of information you could give us. Both of them have a very unique contribution to this. So that's pretty much my question.
Yeah, so generically in Tuan, I think maybe you were exchanging an email with me. It may have been you, somebody else with the same. So for anybody that has an FFRDC, a potential participant, first things first is to send us an email, send me an email, copy me on the PESOSE mailbox.
Yes, I did. Yep.
Okay. Be very clear about what the unique skills or skill sets that they're bringing to the project.
Yeah.
And then I can have this other dialogue about, but go back and look at the solicitation for me, please, in advance of that, and look at who's eligible and what roles and the constraints between those. So that's what we're doing, is constantly looking at what are the requirements, what is the skill set they're bringing and the effort on the project. And what I'm looking to do is to determine if NSF or federal funding is paying for some effort that individual is already paid for. That's that's the lens through which I'm checking it. So I understand you've got a tight schedule. Bear with me. We are down to the last 2 weeks, so we've got lots of questions coming in. And right now I'm the only one. So I'm trying to do these as fast as I can. In addition, we've got other business going on. So Tuen, I'll try to get back to this, but for everybody, send the email to the mailbox. If you put it in the chat, I'm going to go through and just try to do mass emails. Where if I have a bunch of questions around FFRDCs, I'm going to just answer everybody with one email. So I won't get into the details about your particular project, but we'll answer the question around eligibility, the information that I need to see, and anything else related. That's how I'm going to try to get it going in the next few days. So bear with me, Tuen. Thanks for your question.
Kiran, if I can just quickly, so if it helps you, would you want me to send a follow-up email with that and maybe provide a little bit more resolution on what their involvements are?
Yeah. So if you can put this in the email, right? You can make
Yes,
it
I
short
will.
if you want. You
Yeah.
don't have to put all the like the personnel stuff,
Not,
but
not over here. Yeah, on the
right,
email.
roles and then unique skills.
And the unique skills. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I will do that.
Yes. Great. Yes.
Jeff Raymond.
Jeff, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm currently the chief scientist at NSF STC. Thank you for your support. We have a software product and some knock-on software products that via regular sort of research and distribution within the center participants and their collaborators, we've built up quite a bit of an ecosystem already. However, it's not actively managed. Our goal is not to have this be a research tool, but to have it turned into something like a QA, QC industry tool. I get the impression that having a nascent ecosystem already is good. My concern is that we haven't been able to generate the bandwidth to do anything like probe industry interest. Is iCore meant to do that, or are those conversations something that should have happened months ago?
Okay, good question. So you don't have to answer this, but I would just use your example for everybody on the phone to help you think through this. You want to ask yourself, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? How does the technology support that problem? Where are we today with regard to our open source ecosystem? And where do we want to be long term? Given what you're asking, what you describe, I think you're a track one. Because if you have not started talking to industry, and if they're part of your stakeholders, for all of our technologies, we believe industry should be a part of that conversation. So if you haven't had those conversations, you're probably not a mature ecosystem. So iCore, the reason for that is that's a structured learning activity that all of our awardees will go through to help them learn how to organize these interactions and these questions, and then how to take that information and use it to help you scope and plan. So if you haven't done that, and then you're probably in the early stages of scoping and planning your ecosystem. You're probably not a totally nascent because it sounds like you have users, you have contributors, but what I can't hear, what I'm not hearing necessarily is this open source? Is it open? Have you thought about what your long-term vision is and how you will go about your strategies for meeting that long-term vision so you can be self-sustained? So I would say that you're probably a track one, scoping and planning. iCore would be part of the training and the learnings. If you're awarded, that's a condition of the award. Did I answer your question? I was a little long-winded because I want others to hear this more generically. So did that help?
Yeah, well, I know that we're definitely track one, and we at least within the universities that we operate in, we have a sense of who our research users are and how they're going to use that. In other veins, we do our research and our development and scaling, but we've got a really large open source repository. I was mostly concerned about whether or not, as a track one, we needed to have had all of our conversations with industry, other than some hand waving at conferences, or whether or not, as a track one, we can make that part of our strategic plan.
Yes, that's the latter. That would be part of your planning. You got it
Okay.
just right. And you did say something, so for others on the phone to hear this, you do want to think about who your stakeholders are. And if you're only going to serve the academic community, only the research community, I say only, but I shouldn't say it like that. If you plan on serving the research community and you don't want to do commercialization or go outside of commercialization, you've got to make a case for that. How will you move this innovation forward? How will you have broader impacts given your focus? So for everyone, as you think about your long-term vision, the stakeholders that you're serving, you really want to think about what that trajectory looks like. Why does it look like that? And how do you know that it should look like that? So we're not going to tell you what's best, but our reviewers might question if you're trying to make the case for broad impacts and then you only have narrowed it down to a few stakeholders, there's a disconnect then, right? The story doesn't match or your thinking around it. But yes, no I-Corps, you don't have to have that all ironed out. But I would say to everybody on the phone, please, 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 if you haven't ever talked to anybody in industry, you should be doing that. Because number one, you got to tell us a little bit about who you think your industry mentor might be, or the community or the domain you might be picking. Then if you get awarded, then you want to have that relationship. You don't want to, you want to have that relationship built. The first time you talk to industry shouldn't be when you have to determine who your industry mentor is. So you want to be having those dialogues. That's part of building your ecosystem. So Jazgul, looks like Ashley. I can see Jazgul, who is up next.
Sure.
Okay. I'm seeing like one at a time and it sometimes changes. So let's try Jazgul.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. I had a question, I think, related to what you're trying to say. In the actual proposal, when we're trying to describe, so we're track one, and we're trying to describe our stakeholders, who's in our ecosystem. I remember you mentioned in the past, I think it was office hour, how we need to structure our proposal. So you prefer to have like the taglines like ecosystem discovery, organization and governance, risk analysis, community building. Do you still want that in the proposal? And are we allowed to describe like I-Corps separate of those, or should that be included within those sort of paragraphs?
Yes, thanks for asking that. Yes, those sections are necessary. So if anybody on the phone has not looked at the solicitation, please do. We do take those seriously. We want them organized, the information organized in the fashion it is, because number one, it helps us go through those faster. But we know that if you have those sections, you'll think about those kinds of things. Number two, if you want to talk about I-Corps, I would say to everybody, if you're a track 2 and you took I-Corps, you must talk about your learnings. Okay, so if you're a track 2 and you've already taken I-Corps as part of this program or POSE, you must talk about your learnings. It is not sufficient to say, I did 100 interviews. That is telling us what you did, which we know already because that's what the curriculum requires. What we really want to know is what did you do and how did you use that information to inform how you move forward? So what were your lessons learned? If you're a track 1 and you've never submitted and you're a track 2, or sorry, you've never attended I-Corps, telling us what the solicitation says or regurgitating it is not needed. You don't need to tell us you're going to do interviews. We know that already. What we want to hear, though, is your strategies for doing interviews as you know them today. So if you say, we're going to go to workshops and we're going to do interviews, we want to see more detail around that. These are the workshops we think we're going to go to, and this is why. This is why we know this is a state-of-the-art workshop in the country around this topic. We believe we can get a foothold if we get interviews during that. So just regurgitating the solicitation and telling us what it says is not sufficient. In fact, those things don't really tell us much. Telling us how you envision it, as best you know it today, is what we want to see and what we want to hear. So make it tailored to your proposal when you're thinking and those details. So I'll come back to this I-Corps piece in like 10 minutes, because I know we got lots of questions around that. Until then, we have Saad. Did I say that correct? I'm sure I didn't. Ashley, is that who's next?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
So we're planning to submit a proposal for a track 1 project, and we're trying to understand how to use the governance portion of the funds. So the product that we have right now is currently managed by a nonprofit, but the intellectual property of the product is across multiple universities. So can we use the funds to pay for legal work, community meetings, administrative effort to kind of create an independent managing organization or a fiscally sponsored project? Or what would you recommend is the kind of most effective use of the governance portion of the proposal?
Okay, good questions. Track 1 is for you to determine, right? That's the scoping and planning and strategies, right? So you want to have dialogues, right, with those groups. So in a track 1, I'd really be cautious about starting to move out with making decisions and bringing groups together to start to make decisions around legal, for example. Now, if you want to develop a strategy and you want to have somebody in there to help you discuss that strategy, that's different. Be careful on legal fees, because in 2 CFR 200, which is the governing regulations for financial assistance awards, there are some restrictions on legal fees, but your business office should be able to tell you what that is. So track 1 is about developing your strategies and scoping your ecosystem. So you're asking me about governance. So there's lots of different structures for governing bodies, but remember, your governance is about your ecosystem, and there's all these elements around governance. It's not just IP. That's right. How are decisions made? Who gets to make those decisions? Is there voting? How many votes? So the governance piece is very, very broad. The different stakeholders you have involved, the different entities are going to play in it. But your track 1 is to help you get there. So you might have a timeline that says, step 1 is to identify all of our stakeholders. We're going to start with this group. We're going to have 5 meetings, and we're going to bring an expert in, as an example. That's a strategy to help you get there. It's not the actual answer. So we're not looking for you to have an answer unless you're closer to a mature ecosystem, a track 2, in which case you should be able to talk about what that governance structure is and why. Did that help at all?
It does, but I think I'm a bit confused by how much we should kind of run events with people to understand more about the ideal governance
Okay.
versus actually putting things in place. Like, is the idea that right now we have a core set of contributors, the goal is to create governance for additional contributors to have a say in the product? Or like, I'm still struggling a bit with the scope of governance.
Okay. Let's back it up for everybody. First, you got to know, where are you in your ecosystem building? Are you a new? Are you a totally nascent? Are you moving towards a mature? That's going to define how much activity you put for stakeholder engagement or stakeholder identification. So it's up to you to determine what that is. I would say if you're a track 1, it sounds like you sort of have an idea. So I would ask you, why would you want to put a lot of money into holding events unless you see a trajectory? You want to build your ecosystem in 1 year and you want to grow it 100 times. And that's why you want to start doing these things, right? You could make the case and you could do it. But your timeline is going to dictate how much of this you do and where you put your money. So I can't really tell you how much money because I don't, I'm not in your conversations. I don't know enough of the details. You have to determine what your trajectory is. And how does that play along with how you want to do these stakeholder engagements?
So if I may, like we're trying to recruit more contributors as part of growing the open source ecosystem, but the idea would be that those contributors will want to have a say in the long-term direction of the product as well. So my sense is that we would need to run meetings with these contributors to say how do they want this organization governed? What say do they get into this? So that's part of my framing around running these events. Is that on the right track of the expectation here, or
it sure is. I mean, I've seen some people that say, we're going to just put a stake in the sand. We're going to go with this subset of users. We're going to draft the governance structure using those. And then, in 6 months, as we get further along, we'll build it out, but we won't put a hard governance structure in. We'll just have the minimum while we're trying to plan. But I think your point, if that's where you guys want to be, I don't think it's flawed in your thinking.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but the rationale is important. So I think you raised that. So your rationale around why do you want to hold these activities? And it's a strategy, right? It may or may not, that strategy may or may not evolve. So the purpose of the track 1 is to lay out your strategies and the rationale for those strategies as best as you know them today. Okay, if it changes, it changes. You have that flexibility with the budget.
Thank you.
Aurelia.
Hello, I have a question about the type of ecosystem building activities that can be funded, specifically mentorships that are supported by crowdfunding platform. I'll give you an example. Linux Foundation has a mentorship platform that creates crowdfunding to sponsor mentees around a specific open source project. And those are not always, especially for a nascent ecosystem, don't always get found by a crowd easily. So that was my question. Can we fund from our award? Can we contribute to the crowdfunding budget for specific mentorship program around the open source software that we are moving forward through the ecosystem?
So I'm not following how that works. So I'm going to have a little hard time understanding how the money flow. So what exactly does the money, if you were to spend it in this way, what does it buy you?
It buys timelines, because if it's like a sponsored, like if it's a paid internship to do a project on the software, like advanced, for example, security features or close specific security gaps, it will be done on a timeline, right? Within 3 weeks, within 6 weeks, within 2 months. Otherwise, it can be stretched in time on volunteer time in undetermined amount of time.
I may be misunderstanding this, but it sure sounds like there's an existing project. You want to use some of the award funds to have somebody on that project to accelerate what they're doing. And I would say if I'm understanding that correctly, the answer is probably no. You've got an ecosystem that you're building around your own technology, and the money that you're spending should extend further that effort.
Let me clarify. I want to leverage that crowdfunding platform to accelerate the open source built by my organization.
I see, got it.
And they have a crowdfunding that encourages better access to top applicants that are interested in advancing open source projects versus pure volunteer.
So what I'm hearing is you're probably going to have to convince the reviewers that by contributing to this crowdfunding, that number one, there's a direct link back to your ecosystem, and that you and your group actually has some say over it, right? It is your open source ecosystem. Now, if what you're trying to do is get a group of contributors, and this crowdfunding allows you to pull all these contributors over to your project, then the answer is yes. But the primary concern, I think, is going to be the extent to which you can really oversee and have some say in what that crowdfunding is. There's going to be some questions about, are you just sending money over to a group that may or may not do what you need them to do for your project? So there'll be questions about the efficacy of that and whether you can really lean on that. But, propose it. Right, that would be the question, I think, and then the extent to which the reviewers can really follow how this works in terms of oversight and the ecosystem and the governance, et cetera, and the operational components.
Thank you.
Edward.
All right, thank you, Florence, for educating us. Hoping you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Edward.
Awesome. So we are building an early stage ecosystem. I'm going to describe it as a nascent, and it involves multiple components. Say there are 4 components coming together. We intend to open source 3 of those 4 components. Do you see any concerns, or is that?
So I think we're being asked the question again. If you have a nascent ecosystem, or you just have an ecosystem that has 3 or 4 assets, is there any problem with that? The answer is no. But you do have to help the reviewers understand, what is the problem you're trying to solve with this ecosystem? How are these products or assets, how are they related? And how are you bringing them together to meet your short-term and long-term vision? So having a group of unrelated projects is probably going to be a hard sell. But there must be some relationship between all of these products. And how is it that your work, by bringing these together, is going to move knowledge forward? There's some intellectual merit. So there isn't a problem by bringing multiple products or assets along. The storytelling gets a little bit more complicated. But certainly if you can tell that story, there isn't a problem. I just imagine if you've got a lot of products, to be careful when you're telling that story and it doesn't get too fragmented. And then the reviewers don't understand the problem you're trying to solve or how you're going to move that process along. So you're going to have to be very careful about telling the story, doing your planning, scoping, and sequencing the work. So it doesn't look like the work is just spread across a bunch of products and there's no focus on the ecosystem. David.
Thank you for your patience. Can you hear me now?
Hi, David.
Hi. We are looking at a track 1 project.
Can hardly hear you, David. Could you speak up a little bit?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
A little bit. Yeah, just talk loud. Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold the mic close to my face.
Perfect. That's excellent.
Okay, perfect. We are working on developing a scientific software that has been developed and maintained by a federal agency. It exists on GitHub, but it's written in Fortran 77. The number of contributors to it, like I'm one that's not in the federal service. There's maybe one other. Otherwise, the agency that maintains it has kind of a pretty tight lockdown on who can actually contribute to it. So we are interested in having a community governance model evolve for this software so that the state agencies and private sector users can contribute to the maintenance of the software longer term. One of the things I'm struggling with right now is what the contributors would be to this, that we would have letters of contributors, because the only people that are able to contribute through this bottleneck right now are collaborators on the proposal. So, no one else can contribute code. So I'm kind of wondering, are we too nascent to qualify as nascent for this? Or is not having anyone who's not associated with the project who has contributed code to the open source ecosystem still acceptable?
So you presented a big hurdle that I think you need to think, really kind of ponder. Is you said some things that really throw up a red flag for me. So this is locked down by the other federal agency. That's the first thing that really raises some red flags for me. What is the long-term vision? And would your managing organization for this ecosystem have the authority long-term to move this into the open source that it can be more broadly available? So if this is something that will serve an important component for the federal government, it may be a difficult sell to NSF that in fact this ecosystem is anything more than a way to fix a piece of software or bring it up to date for another federal agency. So you see the dilemma that you're in? Now,
yeah. The users that we have in mind are industry and state agency, not federal agency. And what we're seeing is that the federal agency that maintains the software is unable to engage users, unable to accept community contributions. And so what we've started to see is that independent people like me have started forking and developing on the existing repo. And there's just no likelihood that any updates that we do that are community governed or not will make their way back upstream to the official federal repo. So what we're trying to scope is this community supported model that is no longer contingent upon the federal agency to maintain the software. We're trying to make a community supported version of it.
Yes. So David, I think that would be necessary because to your point, if you forked it, that's great, right? So you already are moving out there. So it does sound like you will have the authority to do what you need to.
Mm-hmm.
For the letters of collaboration, if you've already forked it and you've got groups working on it, do you have anybody outside of your direct ecosystem that's able to?
No. So right now we've been hoping to commit changes to the official repository. And so there's only 2 or 3 other people that have gone through that before. We are also the people who have forked and started developing on our own branches and things like that too. So there's not other people that have contributed code to the software before that we could point to.
So David, could you put a little bit of the information in there just to remind me as I go scan the number of questions and stuff? Let me see if I can circle back. There's many more questions I have, but it's going to be too hard to get through in the next 10 minutes. Thanks, David. Manu, you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. And I also read Q&A, and I know it's partly covered, but I'm still a little bit confused with the 30,000 ICOR budget. I assume that personnel wouldn't count towards it because if personnel, including the IM, counts toward it, then it will go over 30,000 very quickly. And I wonder, a related question is that I know Discovery Interview, for those we should not give out gifts or anything like that, then would participant stipend be acceptable? And if I were to select a subgroup that do more in-depth feedback or some testing, some documentation and stuff like that, can I budget for it, and would it count towards the 30,000? And the last part would be travel, like for example, traveling to conferences to do interviews. Like, is that also count towards that 30,000? Is there any other training fees that I should budget? And so that's all. My question open those ones.
Yes. So you ask a lot of questions around ICOR, so I'm just going to pivot to that. Okay. I want to clarify something for everyone. Your budget is your budget. It's how you want to spend labor towards that effort to meet that either track 1 or track 2. Okay. ICOR is just one activity in your budget. And the activity involves 3 people, up to 4 or 5. It involves somebody who has a role of a technical lead, somebody that has a role of entrepreneur lead, and somebody that is a mentor, an industry mentor. That effort and what it involves to attend the coursework, which is 7 weeks, approximately 1 day per week. It doesn't mean you're in class for one day. It just means they've spread the amount of effort when they do estimates. And they say, if you're doing all these interviews like we ask you to, it's probably going to take you up to 1 day a week. How you want to spend that effort or how you want to compensate somebody is up to you. So the PI could get 2 months of summer salary or 2 months of salary, which would include the I-Corps effort. Or maybe you say the PI is going to only take 1 month and we're going to spread it on graduate students that are going to help us. But somebody has to go to that training. It's got to be somebody that's technically and entrepreneurially and an industry mentor. So you can spend up to $30,000 if you want. You don't have to use any of that money for the time that's spent in training. Or maybe you're compensating the person as PI already because they have responsibilities for the project. So they're getting paid already. So they'd still go to training. You just wouldn't put extra money in there for them.
I see. So it's just the extra. And
it's a potential extra cost in there, but right, it's just a subset of your budget, but it's typically labor. You can wrap in your I-Corps, you could wrap in workshops if you want, because the labor is to pay to send somebody to a workshop if you want, or you can cover that in the rest of the award. Right, so it's just a set of activities related to that stakeholder discovery, right? And how you allocate that. If you're going to allocate it all for the I-Corps effort, or you're just going to put half of it towards I-Corps and everything around that. But you're going to have meetings likely to talk about what your strategy is and to write your strategy or refine your strategy. Somebody's got to do that work. So maybe some of that comes out of the award, and maybe the I-Corps, the industry mentor just contributes their time. That's possible too.
So in the budget justification, we have to separate the I-Corps item with the rest of the project item. Is that right?
No, just put it in there as labor, right? So when you calculate your labor, you would, in your budget, you would just look down and say 10 extra hours for I-Corps training based upon.
Okay, we have to clarify that how many hours extra.
Right.
And that counts for the 30,000.
Right. So yeah, you got to justify the labor cost. And one of them is I-Corps training, attending the sessions, going to a workshop, etc.
So for the discovery interviews, like the participants, then can we budget participant cost? Is that also considered as labor? Or
it's under participant support.
And it's allowed.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I would, for anybody else that's left on the phone, please take a close look at, there's only a few items that are not allowed in this program. Your framing is going to be important when you get to, if you're recommended for an award, but we can hash that out later. Okay, we may be down to the last few people. I don't have any more hands that are raised, so that's good. It's 3:23. Alexander is jumped on, raised his hand. Alexander.
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify on the last question, I was actually asking more or less the same thing, I think, in chat at the same time. So to make sure I followed that correctly, so if the PI, they have their 2 months full-time per year maximum allotment, and then if they need to attend the I-Corps training because they haven't previously done so, it is not the case that I-Corps training through that as portion of that $30,000 that can be allotted to it is in addition to the 2 FTEs, right? It has to be included in the 2 FTEs.
So I don't think we have a limit on the 2 month. Look a little closer at the solicitation. So unlike the standard NSF quote grant that's governed by the NSF PAPPG, I think we lift that requirement. So as you calculate the labor effort, right? Yeah, you can add more effort on for the PI, co-PI, senior, whoever's going to be in the I-Corps training. I would encourage everybody on the phone to think differently about your budget and what roles are individuals going to be playing? What are the responsibilities? And then you ought to be thinking about I-Corps as part of that. There's going to be a lot of overlap. So when you get into your budget and you look at labor, for example, and you get into the justification, you might have I-Corps training, so allocate some time towards that, right? But when we look at the bottom line, and NSF goes through and says, wait a minute, you know, half the money is going towards I-Corps. That's going to be a problem, right? If you're a track one, because we told you up to 30,000 we could allocate. But the things that we kind of see for that are travel to workshops for customer discovery, time to attend the trainings, or time, let's say you're using a graduate student, a long-term graduate student, to help make phone calls or whatever it is that you're going to do. You are allowed to purchase some tools, some survey tools, I believe. What you're not allowed to do is market, right? So if you're out there trying to market your OSE, that's not permissible. But if you're out there trying to engage stakeholders, it's a fine line, and it's how you write that. So it's how you break down your labor cost within that $300,000 total budget, which I know it's not 300 with F&A, but it should include I-Corps, and approximately 30,000, no more than 30,000 should be spent focused solely on I-Corps activities. Did that help, Alexander? I have a feeling that did not help, but.
Sort of. So to be clear, we're looking at a track 2 proposal here. I have not previously completed that training, so I was just trying to clarify exactly how I see in a previous answer, and I'd previously read that for like key personnel, that it was limited to 2 FTEs per person per year. And I was just trying to figure out how we would, I was a bit worried that maybe this was going to cut in too much to other responsibilities.
Right. I think maybe I'll look back and I'll answer anything in the Q&A. I don't think they're limited by the 2-month traditional salary cap for the NSF PAPPG. So the policy and procedures guidelines govern, right, a general R&D proposal. We know in TIP ours are slightly different. So more often than not, we have deviations from those. And if you look in the solicitation, it should speak to that.
Okay, thank you very much. I will check.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Alexander. Young May.
Thank you for today.
You'll be the last question. I know we have 4 others raised so quickly, and then we're going to close this out, and then I'll, yes, Young May. Yep.
Yeah, I'm still having a question about this article. So you just answered someone say you can actually pay for the participants. Is that means like if I ask someone to do interview with me, I can pay for their labor? The people am I understanding correct?
So Young May, maybe we should have this via email, because a participant support, it has a definition in the NSF parlance. So I want to make sure that we're not mixing language on this. So why don't you send something in the Q&A?
I send you email. Okay.
Yes, that would be great. Okay, anybody else that hasn't asked a question? We have like 3 minutes. I know, Alexander, you've asked a question, right? I want to see anybody else still on the phone that has not asked a question. Please step up. Syed, you've asked a question. Anybody else?
News and Jolly, they haven't asked one.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the fit for track 2 for the proposal that we're putting down. So we have an infrastructure that we've piloted internally, and it's relatively mature. We have several partner organizations, but now we're looking to expand this and also create an interoperable system where other library systems can connect and exchange metadata. We've started developing this. It's on GitHub. There are a few contributors. Just wanted to understand if this fits the track 2 maturity level.
So what I'm not hearing, Anjali, but you'll have to answer this for yourself, is if you don't have a governance structure or a strategy for one, you're probably not quite there. So you should already be well positioned and have worked through what your strategy is to get to that governance structure. I'm hearing that you have some contributors. If you don't have things like strategies for onboarding or getting maintainers and in growing that contributors, you're probably not a track 2.
Okay.
Yeah,
Even
you
if
might
we
be in
have,
the middle.
okay. So we do have some communities of practice and, those kind of models for the internal infrastructure that we've built. And that's something that we're hoping to extrapolate onto this expanded version of the infrastructure.
Right. So you want to think about, Anjali, it's not just having those things operating. You've got to have all of the pieces around it and understand where you want to be heading and the extent to which all of those groups have had those conversations. So it does sound like maybe you're further along on a track one, but you should already have a strategy for your governance to have conversations around this. You should have a strategy for growing, not just you, but the entire ecosystem. If you haven't had those conversations or you don't have a strategy, then I would guess that you're probably just sort of a little more mature in the track one. Your products are mature, but your ecosystem is not quite there.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right. I know we have one more hand, and then I'm gonna, sadly, I'm gonna have to log us off and then encourage everybody to put their Q&A. So Saad, you get the last question, and then I'll just do a quick close for everyone.
Thank you so much. So I heard you mention a couple times that kind of a restriction on R&D funding, and our primary stakeholder for our product are researchers. And so how do we clarify that the goal is to get researchers to contribute to the product, not to further R&D work? Like I want to make sure that that is not kind of misunderstood as doing more research, but instead it's contributing to building this ecosystem.
I think the way you just described it very simply is you can start with that, right? If the source of your stakeholders are those R&D faculty or other, you can say it like that. You know, a major source of stakeholders is this group because they bring X to the table, to the conversation. However, the goal isn't to do R&D, but rather to get their voice to the table, on the table. But you said it, I think, more simply. So it doesn't have to be fancy, but I do think it's worth just saying it so that the reviewer doesn't get confused.
But then can we also claim the intellectual merit and broader impact of the research of the researchers who are then contributing to our OSP? Or
I would say the technology that you're dealing with, what is the product that you have coming out of this? And what do you want to do with that thing, right? By building an open source ecosystem. So people are going to be contributing to that product, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that going to move the knowledge forward? So the early research, by the time it gets to you, it should be coming out of that R&D into some sort of platform or product.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course. I want to thank everybody for spending the hour and a half. This is the last webinar we'll have. You have the QR code. Please send any kind of questions. Bear with me. I'm going to try to bundle these into more generic ones so that I can get them out. If your email is on there, I can bundle it quickly into that. I will have less and less time, though, to have those one-on-ones that I've been having over the summer with many groups. So I'm sorry that I can't do that with everyone. It's just been just me right now and Marlon as well, helping out on panels. But we will try to get those emails out. So thanks again for showing up, and questions really, really good. I hope these webinars have helped you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.